Okay, so hello, Mr. Bingham.
Yeah.
Really nice to meet you.
It's a great pleasure always to help young people and to tell some of my story.
So you are a British Israeli journalist. You are an actor, an entrepreneur, a Holocaust survivor, and a decorated World War II veteran.
You read the internet.
Yeah, I read a lot of articles about your life.
Yeah.
You were born in Karlsruhe back in 1924. And when you think back to this time, what are your first memories of Germany?
Oh, it was very nice. Don't forget, I went to school 3 years during the Weimar Republic. Long before. There was always anti-Semitism. There was always something there. But I went to school under the Weimar Republic for 3 years. I went to school I was 6. The school begins at Easter at that time. And I was born in January, so I went to start school in April, Easter, in 1930. And for the first 3 years, I was just one of the boys at school. You know, we kicked the ball around in the schoolyard, and I got my share. And it was those were my first memories. It was just at school, it was fine. And I had friends, I can't remember them. But we at home, and we led a religious Jewish life, but that happened in the home and the synagogue, not outside.
Okay.
So you were living like everybody else. My father was a printer, master printer, and my mother didn't work, and we just led a normal life. You will see some photo of me in my youth, and it was fine until things changed.
Yes, in January 1933, the Nazis seized power and Hitler becomes Reichschancellor. What have changed for you as a Jewish person?
It went fairly quickly because the teachers at school, I'm talking particularly about my life at school, the teachers obviously had their instructions. The children were indoctrinated by their parents, who were all Nazis. Then they went to the Hitler Youth. And if you didn't send your child to the Hitler Youth or to the girls' organization, BDM, Bund Deutscher Mädchen, then you might lose your job. So they, of course, all the parents were Nazis. They went to the Hitler Youth where they had to dress up, and I will show you, in uniform in the evening and march up and down the streets and learn Nazi philosophy. The Jews are our misfortune, and then they were singing songs that I had to listen to. The same guys who went to school with me on the day, in the evening, had to march up and down the streets in uniform because they were the paramilitary. You know, let me tell you this. The Nazi idea was to rule the world, certainly to the east, first of all. Siehst du im Osten das Morgenrot, ein Zeichen zur Freiheitssonne. That's what they were saying. Do you see the morning glow in the east? And you cannot capture the world with 100,000 men that they were allowed under the peace treaty of Versailles after the First World War. So what they did is they started paramilitary organizations, of which most people only know one or two, like Hitler Youth or SS, but there were lots of them: National Socialist Drivers Corps, National Socialist Flyers Corps. Even the guys who were building the motorways had to dress up in the evening in uniform, and it was all military rank structure. And they were everybody was a soldier. even Hitler Youth, in preparation for the war, which was the ultimate aim. There was no doubt about that. And so these Hitler Youth marching up and down the street with their uniforms and singing, when Jewish blood spurts from the knife, everything goes much better. And I had to listen to that. So those were the changes.
And was it like that the Jewish community were already suspect what could happen and where things could go?
Well, everybody was aware that this wasn't good. Because, look, very early on, 1933, and I saw it, was the infamous book burning when Jewish culture was burned on bonfires, and I saw it. It happened on the Schlossplatz, where we young boys used to go, on the castle park. That's how it started. I mean, you realize that Jewish culture, German culture, was burned because it didn't fit into the philosophy of Nazism. Interestingly enough, at the turn of the millennium now, 2000, the Time magazine in America asked its readers who contributed most to the 20th century. So the people said Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, somebody even brought up Elvis Presley, but who do you think it was? Albert Einstein, whose books were burned a few years earlier. The German culture was burned, and that's how it began. So we knew. The problem was at that time the policy of Germany was get rid of the Jews, get them out. Not everybody could go. It was very difficult to get in. You couldn't get to America unless you had money or somebody guaranteed for you. No social security, and you couldn't come to England unless you had connections or whatever at that time. And so it wasn't easy. Everybody knew. There were two types of Jews really living in Germany, in Karlsruhe, of course. I was Ostjude. My parents were that high, little kids when they came from Galicia, from Poland. And then there were the German Jews, who some of them only came not much before, but then there were generations German Jews, and they fought in the First World War. I had an uncle who fought in the First World War at the Iron Cross. Nothing can happen to me. I have the Iron Cross. I fought for the fatherland. Now those Jews had a harder time when the crunch came than the Eastern European Jews, who had come from the pogroms of Poland and knew what it meant, but they were living quietly their life, whereas the others thought they were some of them very prominent, and they thought, well, I'm my fatherland. And then that was tough for them when they realized that Hitler made no distinction.
Yes, probably. Can you remember the first time that you realized now is the time that I really have to leave Germany?
Oh, well, throughout the period. Don't forget, I lived 6 years under the Nazi regime and experienced what I call the slow strangulation of Jewish life. More and more and more. And there were the Nuremberg laws. Read about those.
Yes.
And they restricted life, and eventually the Jewish shops had to sell out for next to nothing because nobody would go in. You see, there were there were cases where there were boycotts. And then there were cases when Nazis, usually the SR, the Sturmabteilung, the ones who did the dirty work. Because there was this Schutzstaffel, SS, who were originally only to protect Hitler, and then there was the vast majority who joined up after they came out of the army, and there was this disheveled mass of disappointed soldiers came back and stood on the street corners. All of a sudden, Hitler came and gave them uniforms and boots. Now there's somebody. That was very important. There's somebody. That became the SR. Yes, the brown shirts. Of course, so there was a strangulation of Jewish life. And I was talking, they stood, these SR, these brown shirts, when they stood outside Jewish shops. Don't buy from Jews. Oh, German, defend yourselves. Deutsche, wehrt euch. Wehrt euch gegen Juden. It's the other way around. Defend yourself from Jews. Don't go in. So now there were ladies, women, or men, who said, listen, let's say a delicatessen shop or something.
Yes.
A supermarket, I should speak in English, some kind of a grocery shop.
Yes.
And they said, don't go in. Oh, well, listen, my grandmother used to go into this shop, and my mother went in, and I'm very happy with the man behind the counter. He's very nice, he's good, his merchandise is good, and I like him, he's friendly and he's cheap. I'm going in. And they went in. When they came out, they had to give their name and address. And the next day it was in the paper. These Germans still buy from Jews. Now you can imagine what happened to that family. How they were shunned by women. So that was one of the tricks of the trade that they employed to get the people frightened. And the Germans were not very voluntarily taking part, and others had to go along or else. So that was it. And you were thinking you had to leave. But my father was a printer, so we were not professors. We were ordinary people and lived an ordinary life and had no connections abroad. I had some relatives who were rich, who went and took their mother and so on, but we didn't go. Not that we didn't want to go. It was impossible to go.
One really important day probably when it comes to this topic is the November programs, or also called the Kristallnacht. Do you have memories to that night?
Oh, absolutely. You see, I in school, in my school in Karlsruhe, of course, there was a time when I sat, and go back to this, next to a boy. There was a desk 2 by 2 next to a German boy. We used to have the old ink pots, and you had to put a nib on the front of the thing. Anyway, as you do at school, this boy was copying from me. And he got good marks, and I got bad marks. Same work, he copied from me, got good marks. I lift my finger and want to answer the teacher's question, I wouldn't be called anymore. Now, I didn't say that I would have been right. My answer may have been wrong. But they could not take a chance that the Jew could possibly know something better. So that was one of the things. And then eventually I was sent to the back of the class. They said they decided they can't expect this Aryan boy to sit next to this filthy, dirty, stinking Jew. And I was to the back of it. once that happens, it's a signal. I'm not like them, and they can do with me what I went to the teacher and say, "Look what Fritz did to me," and he didn't. The teacher didn't do anything at all. Did not punish any or asked the boy, "What did you do to him?" Nothing. So therefore, the whole thing changed. I was free, and they could do with me what they liked. And if you know anything about bullying at school, forget it. We Jewish boys it's indescribable. Eventually, we were thrown out of school. There was an order, all Jews out. And then my parents discovered that there was a 9th year of, because education is a big thing in Judaism, education. I suppose everywhere, but particularly for us. And then my parents discovered there was a 9th year of schooling in Mannheim, which is 60 kilometers north of Karlsruhe, for locals. But they managed to get me in to that school in Karlsruhe, and I lived, because we were, of course, kosher, religious Jews, I lived in the orphanage, Jewish orphanage, for that period, by Waisenhaus, the only place I could live. And I went to school every morning from there. The schoolrooms were behind some synagogue. And my father had already been taken away. While I was in Mannheim, there was some accident they took. I never saw him again. But in the morning of Kristallnacht, I went to school towards the synagogue, and then I saw the atmosphere. It wasn't all that far, but the atmosphere was there, and the people, and then I got nearer, and there were people, and there was a synagogue burning. And lots of people looking. I can't remember if they were laughing or not laughing, I don't remember. But I can tell you that the fire service was there. Not to douse the flames of the synagogue, but to cool down neighboring Christian property shouldn't catch fire. So that was what the fire service did. And I saw it in my mind. And then I contacted my mother again, and I said, this is going on, I want to come home. And she said, okay. And you know, if you ask, being old, the short-term memory is not the best, as you noticed. I keep forgetting things. And if you ask me, what did you have for lunch yesterday? I would have to think very hard. I'll probably get there, but I think very hard. And because it comes and goes, the memory. And I can tell you, I took the 3:22 diesel train from Mannheim to Karlsruhe that afternoon. I will never forget the time of that train went. And that was my memory of Kristallnacht. Then I came back to Karlsruhe, and there was some destruction. I was very good with electrical things, and there was a hotel and a restaurant, Jewish place, and I helped repair some of the electrical things. I was, how old was I? 14.
Really interesting to hear that from you. All this was for a Jewish person in your age. 1 year later, you were finally able to leave Germany. You were one of 10,000 children who got transported out of Germany with the Kindertransporte. How did you manage to be part of the Kindertransporte?
The Kindertransport is a collective name. Many organizations had an input. It was just a collective. And it actually started in the end of December after Kristallnacht, very fast, because the Jewish organizations in Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland, the occupied part of Czechoslovakia, got in touch with charitable organizations Jewish organizations in England said, can you do something for our children? They got in touch with the government, and somehow the government said, okay, we will take 10,000. I don't think 10,000 made it because it took 8 months, the whole thing, and then war broke out, and I'm not sure if all 10,000 got, because this was successive from different cities. They rented a railway carriage in an international train or something. And some went to foster parents, some went to family, some went just into hostels, where people might have gone afterwards and chosen a child to take home, I'm sure. And I was part of the religious Zionist youth movement. I mean, I was a Zionist all my life. I had Zionism with the mother's milk. And I went to this religious Zionist youth movement because when we arrived in England, you know, everybody had a ticket. There were different groups, and you went wherever you were taken. And I don't know how I was chosen. There was Fräulein Fenchel, and I remember her name, and she played God. But then there were different quotas of people. And somehow, I don't know why I was chosen and not my cousins, some of whom perished. I have no idea. I got on the list. There were different quotas. You see, when you were born in Germany, now I was born in Germany, I went to school and I spoke with a Baden dialect, but I was not a German. Today, every refugee who is accepted in Germany and has children, the children become Germans. In those days, you were what your parents were. And I had no idea what that was. Did I know? I never went abroad. I was a German boy. Jewish boy. But my parents, apparently I was a Pole. My parents got a passport for me. That nice little clean-looking boy, like any other boy that could have been.
Yes.
You wouldn't know Jewish, not Jewish, German, not clean-cut boy. That was me. And that was the one who was suffering at school. I mean, it's unbelievable, you know, because you have this kind of what you hear, the Jews.
Yes.
That was a Jewish point. Because of this passport, there were quotas, and I must have fallen into a quota of non-German or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, so I went and I got chosen, and I went on the 29th of July, 1939. On the train, and the terrible thing was, this kindertansbuch was unaccompanied children. So now you have to imagine that life for Jews was very bad already. It couldn't get any better if there's war. Everybody knew there'd be war. War was imminent. I mean, throughout, even the earlier transports, everybody, the whole policy of the Nazis was directed to making war. Lebensraum, living space, to the east. So everybody knew. I left a month before war broke out. You just imagine, unaccompanied children, the parents, heroes, took their little children to the train and didn't know when they would see them again, or if. Now, I at the time was 15 and a half. So I was a naive boy. I was very naive in the sense that I didn't know what children of 15 do today and know today. All those, everything, sex, drugs, and everything else. I had no idea about these things. But I was streetwise. You know what I mean by streetwise? You live for years under the Nazis, you become very streetwise, you know. So I knew why I was going. My mother took me to the train. A very sad moment. And unaccompanied children, they would not let no parents. But then there were 4-year-olds. The mother put a, Mommy, I love you, whatever. They think they're being punished. The trauma of those moments, you will never forget. It was traumatic for me to leave my mother. But the little ones who had no idea what's going on here. Why am I in the train and Mommy's outside? And where am I going? I suppose they might have been with an older sibling or handed to the accompanying personnel. That was the trauma of the kingdom. And now I tell you that this is my numbers. 99.9% of all children never, ever saw their parents again. Parents stayed behind, there was war, and you know what happened to them. I am one of that minute number who were reunited with my mother after the war. She went through the camps. Now, you have to remember, she left me at this 15-and-a-half-year-old, relatively naive boy. And when we met again 6 years later, I was 22 and an experienced soldier who'd been through the battles in uniform. That's something to imagine.
How did that come that you became an England soldier? Was it something that you wanted, or were you drafted by the Englands that you have to go?
Poland had a government in exile in England. It was an official Polish government in exile in England, a Polish army and a Polish air force, fantastic fighters, great soldiers. And with my Polish passport, I got called up to go to the Polish army. Well, I went to the office. I said, sorry, I can't go into your army. I've never been to Poland. I've no connection with Poland. I can't speak Polish. I don't know anything. And a sergeant will say, turn left, I'll turn right. And then I said to him, and that you have to believe me, and you are anti-Semitic, and I'm not joining your army. They were anti-Semitic always. That's why my grandparents left Poland from the pogrom. The Poles were anti-Semitic throughout, so this is nothing new today. In fact, Jews returned after the war. There was a famous place called Kielce. And after the war, some Jews went back to Kielce and the Poles murdered them after the war. It's another long story. So they said to me, okay, we'll see what we can do. They said, all right. They released me and said, well, why don't you join the British Army?
Okay, and on the 6th of June, 1944, the invasion to
Normandy. I didn't land on the 6th. The invasion started on the 6th. I wasn't on the 6th in the initial.
Okay.
Later on.
When do you arrived at Normandy, and what do you remember about?
Oh yeah. So that was when we got there. Had already put some tapes where you could drive, where the mines were cleared immediately. And then I got on and eventually got into the big battles. I was driving an ambulance. A funny story. I was trained as a driver. One day on parade, somebody came and said, "We need volunteers to be ambulance drivers." And I start thinking, wait a minute, before the invasion, wait a minute. These ducks, as they were called, there's not a duck like well, it sounds like it, but it's a 4-letter abbreviation. I forget what it is. They will be 5 knots in the water, unloading ships to the shore, sitting ducks, and the German Air Force will come and bomb us to hell. Maybe I should become an ambulance driver, get a Red Cross armband. That'll be better. And I did what you should never do in the army. You should never volunteer for anything. And I did volunteer, and I became an ambulance driver. There was no German Air Force at the invasion. And the ducks had a very good time driving up and down the canals of Holland and Belgium. And I was in the shits, excuse the language. I was where it was tough. Eventually there was a very big pivotal battle called Hill 112, books written about it. 112 is the elevation of that hill. Whoever controlled Hill 112 controlled a large part of Normandy. And these were very heavy battles. And on the other side were German Tiger tanks. The German Tiger tanks with their 88mm guns were far superior to anything we had. They could play hell with anything. They really were terrific machines. And so I was in the battle and did different things.
There's one particular story I wrote about that time in articles about you, something for what you later awarded the military medal for bravery in field.
Oh, and it's on the wall here. This is a letter. The award I got was, I should have gone to Buckingham Palace, but I was in the battles, so I didn't go to Buckingham Palace. So it was a big thing with the division, and they gave me the document. That's a letter from the king. This is the original signal from 1944, which recommended and said why. I mean, it has my original name, I have a different name. And I had to by hand change the name.
Oh, okay.
And this, actually I stuck a couple of postage stamps. These are English stamps, and it has the medal on it. Why? And all along here are the signatures of the whole hierarchy from my unit right up to General Montgomery, in order to say, yes, he should get this MM. And my new name is written over. It was so fresh.
When do you change your name, actually?
Funny story. Well, if you go into battle, it's a 50-50 chance you can become a prisoner. So we were in a field in southern England, waterproofing vehicles to go in the water. That means like patty, like lame, you put around the tintcats, the spark plugs and the distributor and all that, make it safe for water, and you put the exhaust pipe up. We were doing that in the field in the south of England. And I thought, this looks serious. It's going to be serious. So we go into battle, and I start with my name. I'll come to that slowly. And I get taken prisoner. And the instructions are name, rank, and number. That's what you give. I give my name. There'll be more questions. Wow. Then then I may not be treated like an ordinary prisoner of war. The whole story will come out. So I went to my officer. We were about 35 drivers attached to a big ambulance unit, big ambulance hospital, field dressing stations. And I told him that. And he said, there's no problem. We have an Army Council instruction. It's like legal. You don't need any law, nothing. It will be legal. He said, what do you want to be called? I said, don't know, sir. He said, I'll give you half a day off. Go and find yourself a name. So I went down into the village. There were the phone boxes, the red phone boxes. And at that time, there were all the phone books in there. So I looked at first find the first name. Now my birth name couldn't have been any more. You know what I name was. Couldn't have been any more German than it was Wolfgang. So I thought I'll keep my initial W. And I went through all different names, William and so. And then I saw Walter. And I said, well, that's an international name. It's in different languages. Walter, Walter. I'm not sure where I'm going to be after the war. Because the only home I had was the army. So I took a piece of paper and I wrote down Walter. Now it gets to a family name. Wow, what's the family going to say after the war? But I have to do it. And my family name was Billig, which in a crude translation simply means cheap.
Yes.
But people used to say, people who spoke German and heard about it, say, ha ha, cheap. I said, no, inexpensive. My uncle had a shop. And one of the things about his shop is, billig, mijn Name die beste reclame. Anyway, so I had to change his name. And I went through all the B's. Brown, Baker, I don't want to insult anybody who listens to this, but Brown, Baker, Bailey, Butcher, they were all very names, that plenty of them, common names. And I thought, if I have a chance to change my name, I might as well have something a little unusual. So I looked and looked and looked, and I came across Bingham. And I thought, that's unusual. I never heard of it before. No, there's a few Binghams about them. In fact, there is a little town, little place in the center of England called Bingham. I didn't even know it. I wrote this down in my paper, went back. Come in. Well, Billig, have you found yourself a name yet? Yes, sir. What is it? On the same day, they issued me with new army papers, legal. Same day. So at night I sat down, like what I guess newly married women might do, and try a new signature. Next morning on parade, 30 drivers attached, Sergeant Major, all lining up. He called, Driver Smith, sir. Driver Bell, sir. Driver Ben, sir. Driver Bingham. He called the roll. No reply. Driver Bingham? No reply. Now the other guys in the squad were looking around, what the hell is he talking about? Because there's nobody new here. Then he looked at me with a smile and he said, isn't your bloody name Bingham? I said, oh yes, I forgot. That's how I changed my name.
How was your time after the invasion in Germany? What was your job?
Well, I was, I said all throughout the army, we're going into Germany. Anybody can drive an ambulance, give him some training. But we're going into Germany. And they wouldn't let me go because every unit lost men and was under strength. And eventually there was a very big battle in Arnhem, in Holland, over the Rhine. and very heavy battle. If I would not have survived it, because I know myself. And just before that battle, they sent me to London, from the battlefield straight into London. And I went to a secret office. I don't know if you know London, Oxford Circus.
Yes, a little bit.
No, there were one corner was a big, in Oxford Circus, one
Yes.
corner was a big department store. It's not there now, it's different shop. And under the roof was a secret office. And I was trained there initially as a document specialist and as a, generally counterintelligence. And then they sent me to HQ Intelligence Corps Brussels. I stayed there for quite a long while doing nothing, waiting for a job. And the day the war ended, Hamburg fell. And they sent me to Hamburg. On probably the 9th, but I may have left on the 8th or 9th of May. And then I worked in counterintelligence in Hamburg.
Okay.
And that was very interesting. I mean, they made me civilian clothes, and I have permits to do anything. My transport was a blue open BMW car, not our military car. And I must tell you, in all my 2 years almost in Hamburg, I never found one Nazi.
Really?
Nobody was a Nazi.
Ah, okay. Now I understand what you're meaning.
I never found one Nazi. No. Where were you? Oh, you're on the Ostfront. No, nobody.
I read that you, during that time, once integrated Joachim von Ribbentrop. How was it
Well,
for you as a Jew to speak to that person who is obviously also responsible for what happened in the Holocaust?
look, we took over the office of the Nazi Party in Greater Hamburg. I had an office in that place, a little bit bigger than this. It was my office. I suppose you take the cupboard out. A small office. And one day they said to me, Walter, you need to speak to this man. And they brought in to me this man, tall man, unshaven, in British uniform. That meant khaki clothing. They took off his clothes in case he had cyanide capsules or some poison. And he was sitting about as far away from me as you, just the two of us. Now, he was the foreign minister of the Nazis. Before that, he was ambassador to Britain. When the war broke out, he went back. Before that, he was a champagne salesman. And I sat him down and we talked about different things. And then then finally I said, so now tell me, what can you tell me about? Don't forget, Ribbentrop, as a foreign minister, was in charge of all occupied territories. And the Einsatzgruppen, you know,
Yes.
The Einsatzgruppen, all the different things that happened. He was in charge. Then after some questions, I said to him, so we spoke in English and German. I forget, he spoke very good English, of course. What can you tell me about the final solution? Because that was the only term that was really at that time. And he looked me in the eye. I don't remember if he said in German or English, but he looked me in the eye and said, I didn't know anything about that. He was the Führer. Now, as a British intelligence officer that I was, I had to be British. I couldn't do anything to him, otherwise he's an important prisoner. Oh, I said, I see. But I guess now you heard about it. How did you find out? And he said, I read it in the newspaper. We published a big A5 or whatever, the sheet in German, printed on both sides, Hamburger Nachrichtenblatt. A local news sheet every day. And that is where the man is sitting in the Office of British Intelligence. He must have thought we were stupid. But I'll explain this to you. I was a 22-year-old soldier. He was the big shot, and he still thought he was the big shot. He's sitting opposite that guy. And he thought he's talking to some silly old soldier, young soldier. If I would not have been highly trained, I would not have had an office in the Office of British Counterintelligence. Abwehr. So he was wrong. I guess he may have assumed that. He's sitting opposite. And he still thought he was the big shot. Now, after, and I could have. But what can I do? I couldn't do anything. Just keep talking to him. And then I took out a camera. I had a Contax, which was like a Leica. The Leica,
Mm-hmm.
The Contax you never heard of?
No.
Same thing. No, another make. Exactly the same kind of high-class lenses and complicated. The Contax, I took that off the Japanese consul in Hamburg. As you don't mind if I take that as a present from you. And I took his gold cigarette case as well, but he complained I had to give it back. Anyway, so I had this Contax camera. I called in a colleague, said, let's make some pictures. When he saw the camera, this man, delusional, he said, oh, is this for publicity? Do you mind if I have a shave first? Can you imagine that? The man sits in a prison. He wants to have a shave first before we take photographs.
Mm.
He thought he was big shot. Then I lost my cool. I said, sit down. It's like that. So we started trying to take pictures, but you had to set the exposure and you had to set the distance. And everything you had to set by hand, and then you would get good pictures. But I didn't have an instruction book. I took that thing off the console. No pictures. We didn't know how to handle it. Unfortunately, what a great pity. We didn't get any pictures. So that was the story with him, and then I continued with another few questions, and then I sent him on his way. Then he got into in-depth interrogation somewhere. That was in Hamburg where we caught him. I think he was in bed with a woman when they caught him. And he went down the line. And then he was the very first to be hanged after the Nuremberg war crimes trials for crimes against humanity and all that kind of. That was my encounter with the highest Nazi I spoke with. I had a few others, but that was the highest one.
When you're talking about the Nuremberger Prozesse, do you think that these trials did justice in a way to the crimes that the Nazis did, or is it just impossible?
Look, this crime of it was an institutional killing machine. It was industrial killing. They had to go to trial. And it was good that the trial happened and the verdicts. in the last resort, it wouldn't have mattered if they had not been killed but been in prison. You couldn't let them among the people. But it wouldn't have mattered to me if they were just in prison for life and stay there, like Hess. All that was needed was a trial to show the world. To show the world what happened. That was very important. And the verdict was not as important as the trial. And that's in many cases. That's in cases today of when they catch people still. The verdict. He's 94 years old. He must come to trial, and the world must know what he did. And his family should have the shame. In many cases, you talk to people. I talk to groups, German groups, come here for 6 months to help in an old age home. One of my questions to them is, so did you speak to your grandfather, your great-grandfather? What did he tell you? And all I hear is, he was on the Ostfront. That's all this is. And there were, in fact, there were, you may know, there were people who never spoke to their father again when they heard what they did. Germans.
Yes.
Who heard what the father did or the grandfather. That was the trial, and it had to be done. They had to.
Okay, a few years later, in 1947, you started studying back in London.
Oh, I was in 47 I got released.
Okay, so.
And today veterans in America, here, are looked after because you had these traumatic experiences and they stay in your mind. And today, anybody, especially in America, the veterans,
yes.
I don't know, it's a big deal. I got out of the army in England at the end of 47, and I got my coat and my suit and my shoes. I said goodbye. And there I was, all on my own. Nobody cared. There was no aftercare, nothing. I was left to my own devices. I suppose I might be a different person. I'm very fortunate to have recovered from the experiences without any counseling. There were no counseling, no help, nothing. I might even be different if I had help, different today. But I have, thank God, I got over everything. But I got out and got my coat, my suit, and made a living. I went to buy something and sell something. And I got a furnished room for 25 shillings, which that's today about, in today's value, is about 6 shekels or something. And try to get on my feet. It was very hard. It was very, very hard. Eventually I managed, and then I got married as well. But studying, I did very, very much later. I got into journalism. I didn't study journalism. I didn't know there was such a thing. I fell into it. One day was an advertisement in the paper. They wanted somebody, it was a Jewish station at that time. They wanted somebody on the telephones for a call-in show. The guy on the telephone says, yeah, what you want to talk about? Come back when you know better what you want. Or what's your number? We'll call you back. We want you. Or something. I got the job, and that's what I started on the telephones. And radio on the call-in show. And then they found out that I had a little bit more sense than just be a telephone. You know, you'd screen the people who ring up. But they need a little bit of sense. But they found out, and then eventually they gave me bits on air. More. And then I got to other stations. And that's how I got into radio. And you learn, and I began to write. And I wrote, and I was quite good in writing. My studies were philosophy and politics.
Yes.
And so that helped, because philosophy is an analysis. There is no right or wrong. If you write an essay in philosophy, there's no right or wrong. You write, if you argue it well, then okay, it doesn't matter which side you're on. And that was it. I lived. And then I got into journalism eventually, but I still worked. I had a business as well. And then journalism and radio mainly didn't pay. So I had, for fun, I grew a beard one day. Somebody said to me, you know what? With that beard you could earn money. Oh, really? How? He said, go to a theatrical agent. In the end, I had 6 agents. They each gave me work. And that paid a lot of money. Much better than, but I did radio. But I also did the other stuff. Films and advertisements. And there's some in the wall, on that wall here. And there's someone behind the door.
So we talked about the past, and I still have one question about the future. Because what would you pass on to our generation?
We are all God's children. He makes no difference. He makes no distinction between us. It's men who make the distinction between us. And we all, the blood is the same color. You saw my picture as a young boy. And there is no, it's all man-made and power. People want power and use any means to regain it. You have to remember we are all the same. You just want a quiet life. Who cares that the Jew or not a Jew? Who cares? I have no problem. To me, it's a quality of the person. I don't care if my next door neighbor is black or Arab or what he is. So if he's a normal person and lives like we did as normal people within the German society, we are all God's people, and we should not. When I saw the picture of the world, I cried. I said, this is it. That's all. And we can't live together peacefully. We want more and more and more. I know there are advantages in going to space. I mean, we got non-stick pans, non-stick cooking pans because of something. Today is different. But why do we need to go to Mars and beyond and looking for this when that costs so much money, and so much money is needed here to help the people are hungry, people don't have, people are sick. Why do we need to go out there when we have so many problems here?
That's a good question.
I am not in favor of this. Very interesting. Now they want to go to the moon again. They want to live there. And what is it about? Power, minerals, and power over the world. No. I can't understand it. So for your generation, concentrate on making our world better. Don't fantasize about going to Pluto, Mars, and God knows where. Whatever is out there, but there's so much to do here, on this little corner. Everybody's fighting with everybody else. Look at the world. The First World War was the war to end all wars. That was it. There has not been a time since then that there wasn't a war anywhere. They're looking for trouble. Don't look for trouble. Make the world. This is what I'm saying to the younger generation. Don't get involved in these power politics. We got enough to do here. We got enough to. I can't understand it. I can't understand people in Germany today who are anti-Semitic. When there were, wherever Jews came, they contributed to the economy. They contributed to society. They were never a drain on the country. They got into, you see, Jews everywhere. They got into some high positions simply because they want to contribute. If you had a list of Jewish, in my days, of artists and of musicians and of writers, alone those that got burned, Thomas Mann, Jakob Wassermann, Heinrich Mann, all these people, Einstein, because he was Jewish. You see, they shot themselves. People shoot themselves in the foot by doing what the Nazis did, simply because somebody belongs to this particular group. So they cut him off and lose all the benefits that they could give.
Okay, so thank you really much
for
that interview. It was really, really nice to meet you.